which cases they want to take. And I think there are a lot of justices who think whatever the legal issue involved, they'd much rather stay out of this fight. They saw the backlash to what happened in 2000. A lot of people thought that politicized the court and it diminished the court as an institution. So even if we get to that point, and again, really, really low probability it's going to be anywhere close to that, I don't know that the court is going to want this case. They view themselves as above any individual partisan fight. They're not out playing for a partisan team. They're very conservative, they're very progressive. Individual justices have leanings, but they don't necessarily want a Republican to win or a Democrat to win. They don't want Trump or Biden to win. And I think that's going to factor into any decision that comes anywhere through the judicial system at any point about whether the Supreme Court wants to stay the heck away from all of the trouble it encountered in 2000.
It would probably be wise. All right. Well, Professor Justin Levitt, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Of course.
Coming up in our next hour, no decision. The presidential race still up for grabs with millions of ballots still being counted in crucial battleground states. We are on the ground in states that will decide the presidency. And history was made for the Progressive Caucus as two black men who are openly gay claimed victory last night. Plus, the stock market is feeling the effects of the toss-up in the presidential election. Those stories and much more when we return. You're streaming CBSN.
So, I've got a question for you. What if you could watch all the CCO news you want and see all your favorite CCOers anytime, anywhere? Well, you can. Go ahead and grab your phone. Come on, I know it's close by. And go to WCCO.com or get the app and poof, there we are, right next to all those other networks you stream. Bonus time, it's free. You heard right, zip nada zilch, for free. CBSN Minnesota, built by CBS News, powered locally by WCCO.
Wherever you are, wherever you go, breaking Bay Area news, live.
This is CBSN Bay Area. I'm Michelle Griego.
CBSN Bay Area, in your hand, on demand, and absolutely free. Highly updated top local stories and weather where you live. Available everywhere. Powered by KPIX5 News. CBSN Bay Area. Always on, always free at KPIX.com.
We spoke to black officers all around the country about the challenges that they face.
When you're not in uniform, are you ever concerned for your safety?
Out of uniform, I'm just another guy. I'm a black man first.
CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on KDKA.com and on all your favorite devices.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
I've got an amazing story to share with you.
I understand you have some breaking news.
How does it all play out?
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. We still do not know the results from the presidential election as many states remain too close to call. We are still waiting to see final results from Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina, all of which could shape the race. The votes continue to be counted as we speak. Late last night, President Trump falsely claimed victory in an address from the White House, saying he had won the election, which he has not. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is urging Americans to be patient as the votes continue to be counted.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop.
We feel good about where we are. We really do. I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted.
And for more on this, I want to bring in Linda Tran and Matt Gorman. Linda is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Matt is a former campaign aide to Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush and a Republican strategist. Welcome to both of you. Great to have you with us. Linda, let me start with you. Obviously, we can't really play Monday morning quarterback yet. The election's not over. But talk about the historic nature of this election, if you will, and the voter turnout that we've seen. What does that say?
Tanya, I think the historic turnout that we've seen is definitely one of the big stories coming out of this cycle. We're anticipating somewhere around 157 million ballots cast when we finish the tallying. And what it tells us is that the American people are more engaged in the democratic process, small d democratic process this cycle than ever before. And it's no surprise given the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, economic concerns, and the millions of Americans who remain out of work. Clearly, Americans wanted to make sure that they had a say in the future of this country, and hopefully that's something that we see persist through future elections. As we often say, voting is a habit.
Right. And so, Matt, both candidates still have a path to the White House, including President Trump, of course, but he's continuing to undermine the vote counting process today. He falsely ballot dump. Continue. What is the strategy?
Well, to your first point, his path is narrowing. As we see, there's hope that maybe Arizona could open up. Wisconsin now is going to be a recount, possibly, according to the Trump campaign. So his path is narrowing. Here's the conundrum if you're the Trump campaign, but also other Republicans, because down ballot Republicans in the Senate and the House had a very good night. And so if you're a Republican, it's hard to reconcile the fact that down ballot Republicans had a good night, and yet President Trump at the top of the ticket is claiming fraud. That doesn't make much sense, and it doesn't really give credence, certainly, to Trump's argument that there was fraud or misconduct when other Republicans did really well, just not him.
Right. So let's talk about some of these down ballot races, Linda, because there are still some remaining states that are too close to call. But, it didn't look good for Democrats on the whole. Certainly the blue wave that a lot of them were predicting didn't happen. What's the takeaway from that, Linda?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway, Tanya, is that this country is practically as split as we've ever seen it, and that trajectory has continued under the presidency of Donald Trump, and it's something that we can anticipate even in the event of a Joe Biden presidency in the coming years. I think what it says for my party in particular, but all across the board for all partisans, is that there's a disconnect. There are a lot of people who are feeling a lot of pain, and we've got to figure out a way to make this less of a polarized environment for everyone and more one that really helps people who are struggling a lot in this economy. I think there's a lot of work to do on both sides of the aisle.
It's interesting because even, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, some are suggesting that this may be the end of an identity politics, in that we've seen a lot of Latino voters and even some Black male voters, sort of move maybe unexpectedly to Democrat observers to the Republican Party. So, Matt, does that tell you there's opportunity here for Republicans?
It could. Look, I think with every presidential election, especially every winning presidential election, they have their own unique coalition. Nothing like this is static. You can go from W. Bush to Obama to Trump the first time and maybe Biden now. Everyone has their own coalition. It does give possibly a blueprint or at least a way for the future that these people can be gettable, so to speak, that they shouldn't be written off. And quite frankly, if you had told me in 2017 that Trump would be getting the non-white voting percentage that he has, my jaw would hit the floor. And that was a huge difference in places like Florida. And that helped keep the margins down in places like Georgia, possibly. So in the aggregate, it could be a difference maker.
So, let's go back to the presidential race. Linda, in the remaining states that are still too close to call, what does a path to the White House look like for Joe Biden?
I think the path to the White House is exactly where they had kept their laser focus over the last few weeks. You know, we've talked a lot on this program and others about how much time Joe Biden was spending in Pennsylvania. You know, we're watching the mail ballots get tallied today, especially from heavily Democratic areas, including Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And the numbers we're anticipating are going to trend very well for Joe Biden. So certainly if he gets Pennsylvania's 20 electoral college votes, that's basically it, game over. We also see that he's got a lead in Wisconsin and in Michigan, the two other states that, as we all know, were a huge part of Donald Trump winning the White House in 2016, and they're going to be nail biters to the very end. But I do think that ultimately those states will also go for Joe Biden.
And Matt, what about you? What does the remaining path to the White House look, not the remaining path, he's already there, but what does it look like for President Trump to stay where he is?
Well, first of all, Georgia is a must-win. He absolutely has to win Georgia right now, especially how the other states are looking, like Michigan and Wisconsin. He also obviously needs to keep Pennsylvania in his column. To Linda's point, so the more urban centers are coming in now. He needs to hold the margins down there. There is a possibility. Don't close off all the paths with Arizona quite yet. It isn't a great chance, but there are some pathways there for him to claw back some votes. I right now think that's a better chance, quite frankly, than trying to flip a Michigan or a Wisconsin. Like I said, it's narrow, but possible.
Mm-hmm. So, Matt, you know, obviously we've known that this could take some time. The results are still coming in. But based on what we know now, when do you think we could have final results, or at least a fairly clear idea of who's getting those 270?
My guess, and again, this is just me speculating here, I think by the end of today, or maybe very early tomorrow, Michigan, Wisconsin, that's the ball game, folks. So I think that could be a timeline for us.
Linda, you think the same?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, the bigger questions we're going to be grappling with are actually more about the system writ large. Clearly, there's been a lot of discussion about mail-in ballots and that process. Of course, that's something that we've had in play in this country for a very long time. But I think the question on a lot of folks' mind is really about the Electoral College vote. By the time we tally all of the votes that have come in, both during the in-person early and mail ballot period and yesterday during Election Day, it's going to look like Joe Biden is ahead by a historic total vote margin of probably around 7 million votes. And, you know, that's something that we're just going to need to contend with overall when you look at how close the Electoral College numbers probably will end up being.
It will be interesting to compare that popular vote with the Electoral College vote, for sure. I mean, it's not very often in U.S. history that the president doesn't also win or come close to winning the popular vote. And if that continues to happen more frequently, I think you're right, Linda, there will be a lot of people examining the Electoral College more carefully. But we've run out of time. Thanks to both of you. Linda Tran and Matt Gorman, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are watching Pennsylvania as hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots are still being counted. The state has 20 electoral votes up for grabs, and right now President Trump has the lead over Joe Biden. National correspondent Jerika Duncan is in Philadelphia with the message from the Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf about the election.
Yeah, Tanya, the governor and state secretary here just announced that they don't have a timeline for when all of those votes will be counted. But we do know that the counting continues inside the Pennsylvania Convention Center. Take a look right now. Those are the election workers and city officials on special assignment counting those ballots as we speak. They counted a number of mail-in ballots last night, starting off there, and now they're counting those in-person ballots. About 80% of the vote has been counted here for Pennsylvania, with Donald Trump up about 10 points or so, but it is not yet finished. It's not complete, and we do not have a winner yet. So officials just warning everyone from the governor to the Secretary of State to be calm and be patient and know that they will eventually have a result here soon. But again, they had cautioned that due to the amount of mail-in ballots they received this year, over 2.5 million, that this would take some time before we have a decision. Tanya?
Jerika Duncan, thank you. Joe Biden appears to be moving closer to clinching a historically Republican state in the Southwest. Our battleground tracker rates Arizona as likely for the Democratic candidate. Hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots are still being counted. For more on Arizona, I want to turn now to Mark Brnovich. He is the state's Attorney General. Attorney General, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So I want to ask you, Arizona is a state that Democrats have only won twice in the last 70 years in the presidential race. We've also, rated Senate candidate Mark Kelly as likely to win in the Senate race in Arizona. I know that you are a Republican, but as one of the top elected officials in the state, what changes have you noticed in the electorate or in the demographic that has led toward this lean toward Democrats in such a red state?
I think when Republicans have good quality candidates, they win elections. And I think when the Democrats have good candidates, they do well as well. So I think when you look at our situation in Arizona, this is the state that, brought us Barry Goldwater and John McCain, but it's also the state that brought us Bruce Babbitt and Morris Udall. And so we have a fiery independent streak out here in Arizona, that rugged individualism. And when we have good candidates, they win. It's as simple as that.
Now, of course, the pressure's on right now. All eyes are on Arizona and making sure that the counting proceeds apace. How are you guys making sure that every vote will be counted, and when do you believe we can expect final results?
Well, every vote does need to get counted, and one of my jobs as the Attorney General is to ensure the integrity of the election. So no matter who wins or who loses, we all have confidence in the system. And I think that as Americans, we need to realize, we need to appreciate that peddling in conspiracy theories or undermining the credibility of elections doesn't do any of us any good, regardless of where we live. And here in Arizona, I think we can expect probably at least a week till we get the final results. There are about 500 or 600,000, up to 600,000 outstanding ballots. If you look at the way the numbers are right now, President Trump is winning these leftover ballots, these remaining ballots, at about 60%. So if you look at the numbers, I'm no math whiz, but if you look at the numbers, it appears to me at least that President Trump will actually win Arizona by a razor-thin margin, assuming those numbers stay consistent.
And are those mostly, these 600,000 that still need to be counted, are they mostly mail-in ballots, or is it just a matter of the sheer volume takes a while to get through?
It's actually a combination of day of voters, which broke very heavily for Republicans. And if you look at the way those ballots are pulled, it also are ballots that were dropped off the day of. Sometimes people will get a mail-in ballot and then actually physically return it to the polling station. And those were also late arriving mail-in ballots, so ballots that came in after Friday and hadn't been able to be counted. And so if you look at those groups, at least what we've seen statistically is those were ballots that broke heavily for Republicans.
Right. Well, but you make a good point, I think, which is that, look, the narrative seems to be in some places that all of these late counting ballots are trending toward Biden. But you say that's not the case in Arizona. The president should want these votes to be counted because it looks like that they're leaning towards him. So, when you look at his call to sort of stop the voting in some places, what would you say about that? Or the counting, rather?
Yeah, I think it's important that regardless of what state we live in, that all of us have faith and confidence in the process. And what that means is there's a set of rules, there's a set of statutes as to how votes should be counted, how early ballots should be received, and we need to consistently apply the law, regardless of where we're at. And I think that at the end of the day, as I said, as Americans, we have to have confidence in the system. And it's easy to be a good winner or a gracious winner, but we also need to recognize that part of what makes this country great is that we need to have good losers. And what I mean by that is not that everyone's proud of losing, but we need to accept the results. And we need to make sure that people have confidence in the system. And it doesn't serve anyone, anywhere, if people, whoever they are undermining our confidence in the system.
That's what makes a strong democracy. Absolutely. I want to ask about, sort of Latino and Hispanic voters there, because President Trump has appeared to cut into his margins with Latino voters in many states. But it doesn't quite seem to be the case in Arizona, where Joe Biden is apparently leading with a 2-to-1 majority among those voters. What do you believe that Republicans specifically need to do to win those Latino voters in Arizona going forward? And I say that because we've discussed a lot, on this show about how Latino voters across the U.S. are certainly not a monolith. They're a very diverse group with specific, needs and interests. So talking about that group in your state, what do Republicans need to do to speak to them?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need candidates that are consistent in what their beliefs are, and they need to express those beliefs. I'm a first-generation American. My family fled communism, and I think my experience is common with a lot of other immigrant groups, and that is we want the rule of law to apply to everyone equally. And that means no matter who you are, where you're from, what your last name is, what language you speak, that everything or the law will be applied consistently to you. And too often in today's society, both Republican and Democrat, it seems like there's one set of rules that if you're powerful and wealthy and wealth connected, and there's another set of rules for everybody else. And so we need to ensure, and I think that whether they're Latino voters or Hispanic voters or Eastern European voters, that if we respect the rule of law and we're consistent and how that law will apply to everyone, regardless of who they are, that that is the way, I think, for Republicans to consistently get voters regardless of where they're from.
All right. So in terms of making sure that every ballot, makes it into your state, I know you guys are still counting, but is there anything in future elections that this has taught you that you might want to put into place when it comes to, mail-in balloting, absentee balloting, day of? This was an election that...
my concern was, COVID was, obviously a pandemic. It was terrible, but, this country in its past, we've had issues, we've had world wars, we've had pandemics, we've had social unrest, but it didn't stop us from, functioning as a society and making sure that, people got a right to vote. I mean, we didn't stop voting during World War II or World War I or even during the Spanish pandemic. And so we need to recognize that you can do the application of the law. But what that also means is that I think it's very disingenuous for groups to file a lawsuit literally when early voting's already started, or there was a lawsuit regarding registration that was filed, shortly before the deadline. And so what that does is I think it creates havoc and it creates uncertainty. And even our U.S. Supreme Court has recognized that when you have these late lawsuits, what you end up doing is causing more chaos. And if you cause chaos, that actually undermines or not only people's confidence in the election result, but it also deters people from getting out there and voting. So I think it's important that as we move forward, that people know what the rules are and they don't try to undermine or change the rules at the last minute. And they don't try to find some federal judge to change the rules for them, or change the rules of a state legislator, because that's not the way our system works. And I think that undermines people's confidence in the system when you have one federal judge unilaterally rewriting a state's election laws, regardless of whether, what issue you want.
Sure, of course. You want voters to go into, election day, or at least the time leading up to election day, confident that they know how to vote so that their vote is counted. If they suddenly lose confidence that their vote is counting, then that's a mark on democracy for sure. All right. Well, Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. Peace.
Still to come, the election and the financial markets. A look at how the stock market is reacting to the uncertainty of the presidential election. And as the country and the world wait for the results, one of the nation's adversaries, Russia, is keeping a close eye on the outcome. You're streaming CBSN.
These are hard, tiring, taxing jobs, even before coronavirus came.
This is my Clorox wipes, my Lysol. I have no idea what I'm walking into. I don't know if the customers are carriers.
I feel privileged to be out here when so many people are out of work.
Did you ever think that you would find yourselves at the front line?
We have the opportunity to bring something valuable to the community, and that feels good.
We have to be willing to change policy on a permanent basis to recognize and honor these workers.
It doesn't seem like it's worth the risk that you endure every day.
I have to do what I can to take care of myself and my family.
If you had the choice, would you stay home?
Maybe, yeah.
shocking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The concentration of the highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it?
What is the next area that you are concerned about?
What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Even really young kids are feeling what's going on right now. How should parents be talking to them about this whole question of racial justice?
How do we embrace this moment and turn it into real change?
What we really must focus on is moving from protesting to policy.
Investors are also waiting to learn who will be the next president of the United States. So for more on the financial markets, Heather Long joins me. She's an economics correspondent at The Washington Post. Hi, Heather. Great to see you. We, of course, don't yet know who will be occupying the White House, yet the markets have seemed to rally on this news, up sharply today. I'm certainly no market expert, but it seems to me the markets don't usually like uncertainty. So what can we make of this?
Well, basically, the market looks at the two most likely scenarios, which is President Biden with a Republican Senate or President Trump with a Republican Senate. And both of those scenarios in the past, so a Republican president and Republican Senate or a Democratic president with a Republican Senate, have actually tended to be the two highest returning scenarios for markets. So bottom line, even though there's still a lot of uncertainty about who will occupy the White House, and we saw a lot of jitters in markets overnight, most people on Wall Street are looking at what they're seeing and thinking, we can live with this, and this might actually be good for us.
So interesting. So how do you see this playing out in the markets if the tally count extends over the next few days, though? I mean, is this a reaction to something they assume, or the market assumes, will be resolved in the next day or so? Will it change if we have no resolution for a few days or even a week?
Yeah, that's a great question. It probably will change if this drags on for weeks. But again, I think most people on Wall Street, most investors I'm seeing are looking at this. They're seeing the comments from Mitch McConnell in the Senate. Suddenly he seems more open to doing stimulus. That's a bit more of a positive than what we were seeing a week ago, for example. You know, the two biggest issues here for most people in markets are what's going to happen with the coronavirus and what is going to happen with this stimulus that's been stalled in Congress. And some of that's looking a little better on the stimulus, even though the political situation for the White House is so unresolved.
It's so interesting how you laid out those scenarios and the way the market responds to them. One, a Republican president with a Republican Senate, or two, a Democratic president with a Republican Senate. And those are the two scenarios that Wall Street likes, because you would think, you know, with a Democrat in the Oval Office and Republicans controlling the Senate, that administration might not be able to get much done. But that's not how Wall Street sees it?
Well, that's exactly how they see it, but they see that as a positive scenario. So note after note in my inbox this morning from Goldman Sachs, from JP Morgan, from Barclays, from all these big banks is, hey, look, looks like we might have divided government going forward. You know what that means? It means that President Biden won't be able to do a tax increase. He wouldn't be able to do a big climate agenda like some sort of Green New Deal. He wouldn't be able to do a big overhaul of healthcare. And look at the stocks that are up big today. There's two big areas that are surge stock. And again, the market is looking at this, and if the Democrats, if there had been a blue wave, there would have been a lot of pressure on Democrats to break up some of these big tech companies. Now that that blue wave is not happening, tech stocks are soaring. There's much more of a belief that there isn't going to be dramatic change.
But the Republicans have targeted the tech companies as well, though. This, for different reasons, perhaps. Their ideological motivations may be different, but there's certainly no indication that Republicans are going to look favorably on the big tech companies.
Yeah, you're right. And you're obviously seeing a lot of anger and angst about that. Even today, some tweets from Republicans who are upset that some of the President Trump's tweets, for example, were being tagged as inappropriate or as not factual on Twitter. And so you're right. There's clearly going to be ongoing tension. But again, if you're Wall Street and they were pricing in before this morning, they're pricing in a blue wave. They're pricing in much more regulation. Things, it's all relative. That's what's going on. People are repricing things on Wall Street, and they are seeing a little bit less of a concern of heavy-handed regulation. Is that the right move for the country? We can all debate that going forward, but that's, I think, the reaction that you're seeing in the market. And you're right, if this drags on, the big wild card here for businesses and the market is, does this contested election drive societal unrest? Do protests turn into riots? You've seen a lot of businesses and companies boarding up their store fronts, putting up those blockades and barriers. There is still a big concern that something could spark here into some sort of riots. If that happens, I think that begins to really spook investors and business leaders. But right now, things seem pretty peaceful when you walk around many cities.
Yes, they do, as democracy plays out. All right, well, Heather Long, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Countries from around the world are awaiting the outcome of our election. That includes our adversary, Russia. President Vladimir Putin has not publicly stated who he hopes will win the U.S. election, but has said he will work with whoever it is. Holly Williams has more.
Well, Russia's President Vladimir Putin appeared on Red Square just behind me during celebrations for a national holiday here in Russia, but he said nothing about the U.S. elections. And Russia, which U.S. intelligence concluded interfered in the 2016 election with a clear preference for President Trump, has publicly at least been quite even-handed this time around. President Putin has even said that he'll work with whoever wins. Now, you might dismiss that as a smokescreen, but remember that experts in disinformation say that Russia's overarching strategic goal isn't about one election or one candidate, but rather about sowing public distrust in the US, including in the political process. And to that point, what we have seen is the Russian media portraying this US election as potentially chaotic, embarrassing even, and symbolic of a dysfunctional system. But what about ordinary Russians and their level of interest in this US election? Well, you may be surprised to learn that a recent poll found that 55% of people here had not heard of Joe Biden. Holly Williams, CBS News, Moscow.
We're going to take a short break now, but this is a good time to remind you can stay up to date by downloading our CBS News app. Stay with us. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
So, I've got a question for you. What if you could watch all the CCO news you want and see all your favorite CCOers anytime, anywhere? Well, you can. Go ahead and grab your phone. Come on, I know it's close by. And go to WCCO, the app.
Wherever you go, breaking Bay Area news, live.
This is CBSN Bay Area. I'm Michelle Griego.
CBSN Bay Area. In your hand, on demand, and absolutely free. Highly updated top local stories and weather where you live. Available everywhere. Powered by KPIX5 News. CBSN Bay Area. Always on, always free at KPIX.com.
We spoke to black officers all around the country about the challenges that they face.
When you're not in uniform, are you ever concerned for your safety?
Out of uniform, I'm just another guy. I'm a black man first.
CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on KDKA.com and on all your favorite devices.
The next occupant of the White House is uncertain more than 12 hours after Election Day. Millions of votes are still being counted in key states that will determine the presidency for the next 4 years. CBS News is making a new projection. Joe Biden has defeated President Trump in Maine. Nationwide, here's where things stand. CBS News estimates Biden has 227 electoral votes, while the president has clinched 213. Every state without a check mark on this map is too close to call. We are rating Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina as toss-ups. Elections officials in those states are working around the clock to tally votes. The outstanding vote count did not stop the president from falsely declaring victory last night at the White House.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop.
To be clear, the president cannot declare himself the victor. Millions of votes are still being counted. It could take days to find out the final results. Biden acknowledged that in an address to his supporters last night while expressing cautious optimism.
We feel good about where we are. We really do. I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted.
CBSN's political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns is standing by in Philadelphia, where the vote count is ongoing. Hi, Caitlin. So Pennsylvania's Secretary of State gave an update on the vote count today. Let's play some of her remarks.
This is a process. We've got, somewhere, I don't know what the totals are going to end up at, but somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million ballots. And as I've said many times, we had 260,000 ballots cast by mail in 2016. So we will be at 10 times the number of mail ballots, and the counties are already 50% done.
And what are Pennsylvania officials saying about the president's legal threats?
Well, the secretary said that they're about halfway through that vote count and still have millions of more ballots to count. Here I'm in Philadelphia. Right behind me at the Pennsylvania Convention Center is where they're counting all the ballots from Philadelphia. And we still don't have quite a clear timeline as to when they'll be done. We know that they've had 150 staffers here in Philadelphia counting ballots in 8-hour shifts. So they've been working through the night and around the clock. This is the most populous county in the state of Pennsylvania. Allegheny County, which includes Pittsburgh, suspended their vote counting last night and resumed it at 10 a.m. this morning. So votes still being counted there. This is something that we knew about heading into election night, especially heading into Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania officials have been telling us for months that we shouldn't have expected the results on election night because they weren't able to open mail-in ballots to begin to even process them until Election Day. So that's led to why we're still waiting for vote counts here in Pennsylvania. Of course, this is a critical state. The margins are close, and both candidates are hoping to include Pennsylvania in their victory. It's more important for President Trump to win Pennsylvania than it is for Biden. Biden seems to have a couple paths forward without the state, but still, since they campaigned here very heavily in the final days, the president's team already trying to kind of denigrate the results here without evidence. We should say also that we spoke to lots of supporters of the president throughout the few days that we've been here who did cast their ballots by absentee as well.
And so, Caitlin, what is the mood right now from both the Biden and Trump campaigns? I mean, we played some sound bites from earlier, from last night. What are they feeling right now?
Well, here's where the two campaigns stand. We'll start with the Biden team. They believe that they are going to win Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Nevada. They spoke to reporters on a conference call earlier today and said that those states, they look poised for victory. They also think that Georgia is a toss-up. They're waiting on the votes from Atlanta and figure that those will favor the former vice president. They have also looked at North Carolina and see North Carolina as actually tipping to President Trump. The president's campaign has put out a statement saying that they are prepared to ask for a recount in Wisconsin. If a race in Wisconsin is within a percentage point, a campaign can ask for a recount. So the Trump team has already signaled there. They are disputing returns already in Arizona. That race has not been called by CBS, but it is leaning Biden. So that's kind of where the map is right now. So key states to watch, of course, Pennsylvania, where I am, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, and North Carolina.
And Caitlin, what are the dynamics that we're seeing at play here with some of those states as the vote counts come in? We're seeing now more mail-in ballots start to be counted. Is that what's accounting for, some of the shifts?
That's certainly why it is taking a long time. Remember, these states ramped up their vote by mail, their absentee voting programs in light of this pandemic to give people options to vote. Here in Pennsylvania, however, they expanded no excuse absentee as an option for voters before the pandemic. This was actually a bipartisan issue here in Pennsylvania. But it's also important to note that the reason that Pennsylvania and other states haven't been able to start opening up ballots is because there was resistance from Republican lawmakers here. There had been Democratic lawmakers asking for earlier processing of ballots to avoid this very situation that we're now in, where we're waiting for those votes to be processed and tabulated. But Republicans resisted that. So this is a very close race still. It's every vote counts, but we should also let our viewers know that these votes that we're talking about are all legal votes. These are all ballots that have already been cast. So that's an important message for our viewers as well.
Absolutely. We are waiting on the count of legal votes. All right. Well, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much. And we have some breaking news out of the Badger State. CBS News is projecting Wisconsin to flip for Joe Biden. That would mean 10 more electoral votes for Biden. This is, of course, a battleground state that President Trump won in 2016. So losing Wisconsin is clearly a big blow to his campaign and tightens the president's path to retaining the White House, but does not block it altogether. Again, CBS News is projecting Joe Biden has won Wisconsin to give him a current total of 237 electoral votes to President Trump's 214. We will have more analysis ahead. So let's turn now to our strategists, Jamal Simmons and Rachel Bovard. Jamal is a CBS News political contributor. Rachel is a senior policy advisor for the Conservative Partnership Institute. Welcome to both of you. Jamal, look, we don't even have a winner yet, so it's far too soon to start crafting a narrative about this election's results. However, given that there are so many ballots still out there, Should the Biden team feel confident about a victory, and are there any lessons he should start taking away from this election?
Well, the Biden team's got to start focusing on what's going to come next, because the reality is the votes are coming in. They're coming in slowly, but it's starting to look like he's ahead in enough states to get to 270 electoral votes. So if that trend continues before the end of the week, we will probably have some indication that Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States. For me, the big question is about what if the vice president is going to be not just a Democratic president, but an American president. He's got to find a way to talk to the voters that didn't vote for him. And my suspected outsider issue is I find a way to bring them in and give them a shot to do better. And I think Democrats haven't been as explicit about how they want to do that.
All right, so Rachel, we've already seen the president falsely declare victory and attempt to sow doubt with claims of fraud. And we just have to keep repeating that this is completely untrue, because there are millions of votes yet to be determined, legally cast votes. So shouldn't the president be encouraging the democratic process to play out, make sure that every legally cast ballot is counted regardless of how long it takes?
Well, it's obvious that neither candidate has secured a victory. And to your point, I think what you're seeing right now is both campaigns exude confidence in their victory. You've seen President Trump say it. You've seen Vice President Biden say, look, we're going to win this. Yeah, we're going to win this thing. You saw his election lawyer, Bob Bauer, this morning at a briefing say, we have won this thing. Americans don't need to be protected from campaigns exuding confidence in their victories. I do expect both campaigns will be pursuing the necessary steps to make sure that every ballot is counted, that the voter integrity of ballots cast is secured, because that is a right both campaigns have. So I don't think we're going to know in the next day or two, but hopefully we'll know, close to the end of the week.
So, Jamal, one thing that does seem to be clear is the Latino vote is not a monolith. That is something we've talked about on this show for a while. In areas like Florida's Miami-Dade County, home to a heavy Cuban-American population, and in Texas, where you've got, multi-generational Latino families, and near the Rio Grande, Biden ran behind Hillary Clinton with some of these groups. But in other places, like Arizona, which CBS News estimates is likely for Biden, he ran ahead of Clinton with Latinos. So does that tell you that for the future of the Democratic Party, if they want to continue to try to cultivate those votes, they've got to get a lot more specific?
They do have to get a lot more specific. If you look at what happened in Florida, I was down there in 2018 when Andrew Gillum was running for governor. And one of the things that we saw during that race, I was just there as an observer, but you hear these stories about Rick Scott, who had been governor of Florida, and how when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico and Donald Trump went down there and threw out paper towels to people, Rick Scott established welcome centers for people when they showed up in the state. He went to every small community's group. There was a Honduran American festival. He was there. There was a Venezuelan festival. He was there. So he paid attention to the more micro-targeted parts of the Latino community. I think Democrats do have to get more specific about it, because they've got to start looking at this broad panoply of Americans, not as add-ons or extras, but these are the people who are they're the elements of the quilt that get Democrats to victory. I think Barack Obama did that when he ran in 2008, when I was a part of that group. And what he did was he allowed, whether it was Haitian Americans, Venezuelan Americans, all these different groups to have. Ethiopian Americans had their own little mini campaigns. He gave everybody a chance to feel invested in that campaign. I think Democrats have to recapture that.
Right. And Rachel, looking at the president's campaigning, though he still, trails by wide margins, it seems clear that the president made inroads nationwide with Black and Latino voters, sort of specifically male Black and Latino voters. What does this tell you about the coalition the Republican Party is trying to build?
Well, I think the nature of the Republican Party is changing, and the realignment that is going on, I think, is even further along than I think operatives in D.C. were even prepared for. And I think the exit polling is showing us that. But to a great extent, I think Jamal's critique is correct in the sense that both parties, I think, tend to take certain racial demographics for granted. And that is no longer acceptable, I think, in many parts of America. Race is not determinative of outcome. To a great extent, identity politics isn't working because a lot of racial voters care about bread and butter issues. They care about economic issues. They care about jobs. And they're going to respond most favorably to the candidate who I think talks to those issues. And that is, I think, where the Republican Party is trying to expand its tent, to not simply focus on, traditionally the party of banks and Wall Street and those kind of areas, and focus more on the bread and butter economic issues that have had consequences from things like free trade. Speaking more about protecting middle class and working class jobs. And that, I think, has been a core of Trump's economic message and something the Republican Party as a whole is going to have to reflect, I think, if they want to continue to be relevant going forward.
If I could just hop in here.
It's interesting, I think.
It could happen very quickly.
Please, no, Jamal, go on.
Okay, the delay, I'm sorry. There are two things I think are driving a lot of the anxiety that people are feeling. Obviously, there's globalization that's occurred over the last couple of decades and factory jobs that have disappeared. I grew up in Michigan, so I've seen that firsthand. Secondly, it's the increasing diversity that's taking place. And I think for a lot of white Americans, particularly white non-college Americans who may view themselves in a job market that's getting tighter, what the president has done very explicitly is tie their economic misfortune to the diversification of the American society. And I think that's the thing that is driving so many people nuts on the liberal side of the equation, is because it's actually not brown people, black people, people of color. It's actually that Wall Street and the wealthier people are making so much more money and capturing so much more of the resources of the economy. So if we could find a way as a society to say, listen, we want to focus on workers, we want to equip them, we want them to be able to compete in the global economy. And yes, the wealthiest among us are going to have to pay more in order to make that happen. I think that is the bridge that can maybe tie these two different wings of American politics together.
Yeah, I think you're both making great points, because it seems like one thing this election will teach us, no matter who wins, is that it was, very, very close, and both parties need to be doing some soul searching, about the voters that they're hoping to court. And so, Jamal, I want to go back to you about Democrats, because, they don't appear like they will do as well as they would have hoped in both chambers of Congress. Winning the Senate majority is uncertain. They are on track to lose some House seats, although they will likely keep their majority there. That was widely unexpected. So what lessons should Democrats take away from these potential shortcomings? I mean, the blue wave did not happen. Do they need a shift in strategy or in leadership? What's your take?
Yeah, the blue wave was like a trickle that came from the faucet. It wasn't really very much at all for Democrats this year. So, listen, I think what's going to have to happen is, like we've been talking about, Democrats need a good diagnosis of the problem and some solutions about how to fix it. Globalization, technology, software, robotics that are coming that are hurting people. And we've got to figure out, if we're going to be a country that's so diverse, 43% of millennials are not white, 50% of the generation after them fit the same category. If we're going to stay together as a country, we have to start having explicit conversations about how we're going to do that. Donald Trump's having an explicit conversation, and it blames people of color. If liberals and progressives want to send people the other direction, they've got to get more clear about how it is we tie all these fortunes together.
All right, well, great conversation, but we've run out of time. Jamal Simmons and Rachel Bovard, thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The balance of power in Congress still to come. Seats in the Senate and House are shifting and flipping in some states. We'll dive into the new congressional makeup. And weight of the world. The nation's allies and adversaries are standing by to see who will lead the United States. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
So, I've got a question for you. What if you could watch all the CCO news you want and see all your favorite CCOers anytime, anywhere? Well, you can. Go ahead and grab your phone. Come on, I know it's close by. And go to WCCO.com or get the app and poof, there we are, right next to all those other networks you stream. Bonus time, it's free. You heard right, zip nada zilch, free. CBSN Minnesota, built by CBS News, powered locally by WCCO.
Wherever you are, wherever you go, breaking Bay Area news live.
This is CBSN Bay Area. I'm Michelle Griego.
CBSN Bay Area. In your hand, on demand, and absolutely free. Highly updated top local stories and weather where you live. Available everywhere. Powered by KPIX 5 News. CBSN Bay Area. Always on, always free at KPIX.com.
We spoke to black officers all around the country about the challenges that they face.
When you're not in uniform, are you ever concerned for your safety?
Out of uniform, I'm just another guy. I'm a black man first.
CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on KDKA.com and on all your favorite devices.
While the presidential race hangs in the balance, the control of the Senate is also in play. Some races in the chamber are still too close to call. Here's where we are now. CBS News projects Republicans have 47 seats and Democrats have 46, leaving 7 seats still up for grabs. Either side needs 51 seats to take the majority. Bafta Yamam has more.
It's a waiting game for the Democratic Party looking to wrestle control of the Senate chamber from Republicans. By early Wednesday, CBS News had projected 1 new seat for the party, with Colorado Democrat John Hickenlooper defeating incumbent Republican Cory Gardner. But that gain was offset by Doug Jones's projected loss to Republican Tommy Tuberville in Alabama. Democrats are eyeing Arizona, where it looks like Mark Kelly could pick up a seat from Martha McSally.
Thank you, South Carolina.
Top Republicans Lindsey Graham and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell both survived challenges from well-funded Democrats.
Tonight, Kentucky said we're keeping our front row seat in the Senate.
The races remain a toss-up in Maine, North Carolina, Georgia, and Michigan. Democrats had high hopes of flipping some traditionally red states, but fell short in Iowa, Texas, and Montana. CBS News has not made a projection on the House majority, but Democrats have fallen short of their goals.
The House predictions going in are a prime example of what I would call this irrational exuberance.
QAnon supporter Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene is projected to win her Georgia district. The president's former physician Ronnie Jackson took a House GOP seat in Texas, and freshman incumbent Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez retains her New York seat. Bafta Imam, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
The U.S. is officially out of the Paris Agreement. The United States is the only country out of nearly 200 nations who signed the deal to walk away from its promise to reduce gas-house emissions. President Trump announced in 2017 the U.S. would withdraw from the agreement. He formally notified the United Nations of the departure last year, but regulations meant that his decision had to wait a year to take effect. The U.S. could choose to rejoin the deal if a future president chooses to do so. Ahead on CBSN, the election is coming down to a handful of states. Michigan and Wisconsin are the two that could be the deciding factors of which candidate gets to 270 first. We will drill down on the numbers ahead.
So, I've got a question for you. What if you could watch all the CCO news you want and see all your favorite CCOers anytime, anywhere? Well, you can. Go ahead and grab your phone. Come on, I know it's close by. And go to WCCO.com. Or get the app, and poof, there we are, right next to all those other networks you stream. Bonus time, it's free. You heard right, zip nada zilch, for free. CBSN Minnesota, built by CBS News, powered locally by WCCO.
Wherever you are, wherever you go, breaking Bay Area news live.
This is CBSN Bay Area. I'm Michelle Griego.
CBSN Bay Area. In your hand, on demand, and absolutely free. Highly updated top local stories and weather where you live. Available everywhere. Powered by KPIX 5 News. CBSN Bay Area. Always on, always free at KPIX.com.
We spoke to black officers all around the country about the challenges that they face.
When you're not in uniform, are you ever concerned for your safety?
Out of uniform, I'm just another guy. I'm a black man first.
CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on kdka.com and on all your favorite devices.
This could be the worst that you've ever seen. Fires are going to get worse, and hurricanes are going to get worse, and they already are.
Firefighters struggle to contain over 600 wildfires.
Do not let go. Thousands of people evacuated.
It's hard to find a place that has not been affected.
This is hurricane look.
Behind me, you can see that we are in the eye wall.
Download the free CBS News app to watch.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
I understand you have some breaking news.
How does it all play out?
COVID-19 is impacting every American in one way or another. But if you're Asian American, you may also be getting the blame.
Overt, in-your-face racism.
I'm Elaine Quijano. Join me as CBS News helps make sense of the unique impact of the pandemic on our country's Asian American communities and why they are making their voices heard in the presidential election.
We count. Our votes matter.
Asian Americans battling bias. Watch free with the CBS News app.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. We begin with breaking news out of the Badger State. CBS News is projecting Wisconsin to flip for Joe Biden. That would mean 10 more electoral votes for the former VP. This is, of course, a battleground state that President Trump won in 2016. Again, CBS News is projecting Joe Biden has won the state of Wisconsin and its 10 electoral votes, giving him a current total of 237 electoral votes to President Trump's current tally of 214. For more on this, CBS News 2020 campaign reporter Adam Brewster joins me from Detroit. Hi, Adam. So put this into perspective for us. What does this state win mean for Joe Biden?
Well, it puts him one step closer towards that magic 270 number that you need. There will be several other states to watch. Of course, Wisconsin, you mentioned President Trump, first Republican to win Wisconsin since 1984 when he won it in 2016. It was part of that so-called blue wall that Democrats said they wanted to build back in the Rust Belt states in Michigan and Wisconsin, over in Pennsylvania. It has been a focus. Joe Biden used to talk about it on the campaign trail back in Iowa about how he was someone who could win in the Midwest. And so this is a win that would be significant for him and puts him, or a projection, I should say, that puts him, one step closer to that 270 mark.
I mean, we should probably also point out that all of this is happening against the backdrop of the coronavirus. Wisconsin reported its highest daily infection number today, 5,935 COVID cases reported today. So surely this must have played into the race there?
In polling there, it had shown in Wisconsin that people thought Biden was better fit, to handle the COVID-19 pandemic. It has hit the state hard in September and October, and so it was at the forefront of many people's minds who were voting for former Vice President Biden. Now, I was in Wisconsin a lot towards the end of October. I went to 3 of the president's rallies there, and his supporters were not so concerned about the coronavirus compared to Biden's supporters. Of course, that was shown in the exit polls, that difference between the two. So, for people who were upset with the way the pandemic had been handled, this was certainly something that factored into their decision.
I'm just curious, at those Wisconsin rallies of the presidents that you attended, was there a lot of social distancing or masks, or was that largely absent?
It was, I would say, there were people wearing masks, and
more people, though, not wearing them. And these were large rallies, thousands of people standing or seated very close to each other, just like we've seen in Pennsylvania or Florida or Michigan, North Carolina, Arizona, anywhere else the president had traveled recently.
Right. All right. So pulling back and looking at the bigger picture a little bit now, what does it say that Joe Biden was able to flip this state from President Trump, who won it in 2016? As you pointed out that, before 2016, it had a pretty solid Democratic history. So perhaps that isn't as surprising as flipping a traditionally red state. But still, it's got to mean something to his campaign.
It's something that Democrats really talked about. I mean, the three states that they were focused on most during the early days of the caucuses in Iowa, of course, Iowa in the Midwest, so, speaking to a similar set of voters. Now, the night did not go so well for Mr. Biden in Iowa, but still, they had focused on winning back these Midwestern areas, and that had kind of been the building blocks for them, and as they built out their campaign and looked at their paths to 270. Of course, two of those states are still in question, Michigan and Pennsylvania, as there are still many ballots left to be counted in both of those states.
Right. And of course, the Trump campaign has said that it will immediately request a recount in Wisconsin. What can we expect to come from this? Of course, as we've pointed out, we've projected that the state will go to Joe Biden. The final results are not in, so nothing, I guess, legally can happen until every vote is counted. But what would a legal challenge there in Wisconsin look like?
So this is a process. First, the counties will have to go through and canvass the results, basically go back and look at all the results, make sure that every vote was cast properly and tabulated properly. That process has to play out first. That'll take a couple of weeks. The deadline is November 17th for counties to complete that. After that process is finished is when a recount can be filed if the margin is still 1% or less between former Vice President Biden and President Trump. Now, as far the president's campaign said in a statement that there were irregularities at polling places. The Wisconsin Elections Commission Administrator Megan Wolf said today that these elections are administered in public. There is an open, bright light on them at every step, and that there is meticulous detail that goes into executing these elections and carrying them out. So we've seen recalls in Wisconsin before. The state is, or excuse me, recounts in Wisconsin before. We have seen recalls there too. But the process played out in 2016, and when Jill Stein filed the recount, cost her about $3.5 million. It netted the president about 130 votes from that process. Now, if it will play out the exact same way, we don't quite know yet, but there's going to be a little bit of a wait and see period before a next step is able to be taken.
Right. And I guess there's no official number, no sort of margin that would trigger it. In other words, if the winner ends up winning by, hundreds of thousands of votes, it's probably not worth triggering a recount. Is there a number that might be worth it? Of course, we saw in 2000 in Florida that recount was, triggered by just over 500 votes. That seems reasonable. But, is there a number in Wisconsin that might automatically trigger one?
There's not an automatic trigger, but the margin does have to be 1% or less between the candidates in order to file a recount challenge. And so you point out a great point about the margin, around 20,000 votes right now. Former Republican Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, tweeted today that is a big margin to overcome, and pointed out what the recount effort in 2016 did for the president, getting him just an extra, 130 some votes. And that wasn't filed by the president's campaign. He won. It was just when they went back and looked at all the ballots, he ended up with about 130 more votes than initially were allocated for him.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well,
Excuse me,
Adam,
that was the margin.
Thank you so much for your
His winning
insight.
margin was about 130 more. Yes, thank you.
Got it. All right. Thank you so much, Adam. Georgia and North Carolina are both still too close to call. In North Carolina, there are 15 electoral votes up for grabs. President Trump has a small lead in the state right now, but it is a very tight race. There have been several vote counting setbacks in Georgia, a state that offers 16 electoral votes. Georgia's largest county, Fulton County, is still tallying. That area includes most of Atlanta, which is a Democratic stronghold in the state. Officials say they are attempting to complete the election count today. Campaign reporter Lecrae Mitchell has been following the race from Tampa, Florida. Lecrae, thank you so much for joining us. So, what's the latest out of Georgia and North Carolina? Is this another case of the mail-in ballots being counted just more slowly?
So we do have mail-in ballots that still need to be counted in these states. And I'll start with, according to our editorial election app, with 93% of the expected vote in, President Trump is leading in Georgia by more than 85,000 votes. But it's still a toss-up, and it could be because of this. During the press conference this afternoon, you had Secretary of State for Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, say that there are still roughly 200,000 votes that haven't been counted in the state. And to drill down a little bit further, he highlighted a few of the counties where we see some of those numbers. In DeKalb, for example, there are 52 to 54,000 votes that are left to be counted. In Fulton, there are roughly 74,000 absentee votes that still need to be counted. And in Forsyth, he said that there are about 7,000 votes still left to be counted. So what does that mean? That means that there could be as many as 130,000 or so votes that are still needed to be counted in the Peach State. And so what Secretary Raffensperger said is that his team is going to be working with the counties to try to get results out today. But when asked if he thought that this was still within the timeline that was expected, he said yes. And he said that soon enough, people will not be looking at Georgia anymore because the results will be out and they'll be looking at states up north and elsewhere. So he did say that his team is working to also release a full list of those counties to get out to us. And in North Carolina, what you see is we have an update that's scheduled for 2:30 p.m. There's going to be a press conference then where they hope to drill down into some of the results that have already been released. But most importantly, we're going to be asking what is going to be the process for when they're going to report their results for the absentee ballots that are yet to come in. And why that's important is because, remember, in North Carolina, up to 9 days after the election, if a voter postmarked their ballot on Election Day by 5 p.m., they have 9 days, which would be through November 12th, to still have those votes counted. So we want to know, when will those results be counted or reported, and how? Will they have to wait until all of the absentee ballots are in and counted to release at one time, or will they be releasing that information as they get it? So we're hoping to find that out at this 2:30 p.m. press briefing.
So, Lecrae, I guess it just all comes down to the numbers, though. Do they know how many mail-in ballots were postmarked on Election Day that they still might be waiting on, right? Because it really matters if those votes will make a difference, but it doesn't really matter if they're not enough to make a difference, right?
Well, that is why it is really important that we hear from them this afternoon, because you are absolutely right. A lot of times it is about whether or not the number of outstanding ballots is enough to change the race. And so that is something that we're going to definitely be listening out for, too. How many votes are we talking here, and can they make a difference?
Right. All right, Lecrae Mitchell, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Election day has come and gone, but we still don't know who will lead the country for the next 4 years. This political limbo is reminiscent of the 2000 election. Remember that? And the debacle of the hanging chads. We look back and ahead as to how it could influence this year's race. You're streaming CBSN Always On.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
Oh!
boom, and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
COVID has taken the lives of tens of thousands of Americans. Rural areas like this here on Navajo Nation are especially hit hard.
15 to 30% of our Navajo citizens don't have running water.
In any indigenous reservation, there is a shortage of physicians.
Native Americans are amongst the most vulnerable and hardest hit by COVID.
Yeah, the more we lose our elders to COVID-19, the more we lose our language and our way of life.
We need to bring awareness to the attention of Washington, D.C. and United States citizens that there is a need to focus on the first citizens of this country.
In 60 years, we went from about 100,000 factory workers to probably about 7,000.
Off in the distance, you can see some factories that are still humming, but most of them are just kind of abandoned.
The restaurant industry right now is one of the largest and fastest growing industries in America. And yet it continues to be the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States.
Barely anybody's making enough to live.
You're donating plasma to get by.
It's literally a slave wage.
I don't remember growing up like this. My mom didn't have to go to food banks. It's pretty sad.
Even really young kids are feeling what's going on right now. How should parents be talking to them about this whole question of racial justice?
How do we embrace this moment and turn it into real change?
What we really must focus on is moving from protesting to policy.
Join Gail, Anthony, and Tony on CBS This Morning.
CBSN Los Angeles. Get local news, breaking news, anytime, anywhere.
It's easy to find us, and it's free.
Download the CBS News app on your favorite devices. CBSN Los Angeles, streaming 24/7.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
I understand you have some breaking news.
How does it all play out?
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day.
Most of us can remember the year of the hanging chads, those punched-style ballots that helped determine the race for president in 2000. There are still several key battleground states that are too close to call in the 2020 election: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and North